We've got the Athletics football correspondent David Ornstein, as well as our Liverpool reporter James Pearce. James, let's start with you. I mean, in the words of the famous Who song, I guess the kids are all right, aren't they? Liverpool won their 10th League Cup on Sunday. Just explain the significance of this one in particular, because Jurgen Klopp thought, this was very special, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's all about the circumstances. I think probably some people will see Jurgen Klopp's post-match comments talking about this being the most special trophy of his career and think, well, hang on a minute. You've for a start, you've won the Bundesliga with Dortmund. You've won the Champions League. You were the man who ended the 30-year wait for a Premier League title at Liverpool. But I think we know what he was getting at because it's all about the context and the circumstances surrounding this. And to think that Liverpool went into the final without 11 members of the senior squad due to injury, then the horrible sight of Ryan Gravenberch being stretchered off in the first half, so that then you're up to a dozen members missing, and then when you look at the inexperience and the youth of the players, he pretty boldly turned to as the afternoon grew on. You thought, well, surely common sense dictates that Chelsea, when they're throwing on, 150 million quid's worth of talent off the bench, they have to be the ones that are going to finish the stronger, and Liverpool will ultimately be found wanting. But it was a real Herculean effort, epitomised by their inspirational leader in Virgil van Dijk, because those young boys who will, whatever they go on achieve in the rest of their career, they will never ever forget that Sunday afternoon at Wembley, and they were certainly shown the way by Van Dijk, who I thought was absolutely immense on the day.
Yeah, I want to talk about some of those young players. And David, I will bring you in just a second. We just got to indulge James for just a little bit longer on this topic. But, as someone who's followed Liverpool for many, many years, when you see players like Bobby Clark, James McConnell, Jayden, Jarrell, Quansah, Conor Bradley, warming up to come onto the pitch in such a pivotal game, what feelings goes through your head at that moment in time? Because this is a vital, vital game.
Yeah, I think it was more like it was a sense of wow, he really, the manager really is bold and brave here, because I think a lot of other managers would have stuck with tiring senior players and thought, well, I'd rather have a shattered McAllister or a Gagpo
Mm.
out there than turn to players that are so unproven. Because I think it's, you can't underestimate the significance of stepping out in front of nearly 90,000 people in a major final.
Mm.
I mean, Jayden Dance, that story is just extraordinary. He wasn't even training with the senior squad, 5, 6 weeks ago. He came off the bench for 2 minutes in midweek to make his senior debut against Luton. And then suddenly he's leading the line for Liverpool in a major final. And it's, you go through it, you're right, McConnell, Quansah's come from absolutely nowhere this season. Same with Bradley, in terms of both Quansah and Bradley have really grasped opportunities that have come their way due to, of course, those injuries to Matip and Alexander Arnold. And then, Bobby Clark, had loads of loan interest in him, in January. But Liverpool were like, no, we may well need him as cover. And, that has proved that to be worked out perfectly for all parties, because I think he's made 7 appearances for Liverpool since the turn of the year and just seems to have grown in stature with every time. So it was, you could see, you would have to say it was something of a risk playing the kids, but I think that's the thing with Klopp. He's always shown the courage of his convictions, and ultimately on the day, fortune favored the brave.
David, I want to go into this idea of and understanding a bit more about academy recruitment, because, I look at all these young players coming on for Liverpool. I mean, was this a win for academy coaching or more academy recruitment? And can you just give us an insight as to how Liverpool operate within their policy around academy recruitment?
The short answer is both recruitment and coaching, Io. But this isn't just an overnight success or a flash in the pan, or how we've seen with maybe Louis van Gaal at Manchester United when he introduced kids some years ago. That was out of necessity, not out of desire. And the proof was in the pudding, because when players became fit again, those youngsters were nowhere to be seen largely, and aren't at Manchester United anymore, you get a very different feeling with what's going on at Liverpool. And I don't just want to single out Van Gaal and United. There are a number of clubs who you could accuse of not having enough faith in young players. I mean, ironically, it was Alan Hansen of Liverpool legend who said you can't win anything with kids, but you absolutely can, evidently. And what Liverpool are seeing now are the fruits of a very long and diligent labour. And we've got to credit Alex Inglethorpe, who heads up the academy operation. I believe he was actually brought to the club by Brendan Rodgers quite some time ago. And so a nod to the foundations that were starting to be laid under Fenway Sports Group a long time back. And they clearly identified that getting it right at that level will have fantastic repercussions further down the line. And I know something that you want to talk about is how things operate at Liverpool. There was a really good interview with Alex Inglethorpe in the Telegraph by Jamie Carragher, himself a youth product of Liverpool. And he talks really interestingly about a limitation on salaries at that age group. I think it's correct me if I'm wrong, maximum of £50,000 a year. A limitation on car engine sizes to 1.3 litres. And that's mainly for safety, but also for the impression it sends out. And he says that if he sees a Range Rover in the academy car park, he'll send it next door. They're very conscious about if they come in some really expensive watch. And it's not so much about those possessions. It's the message that it sends out. It's the character, as he describes it, the behaviors and the values that are being exhibited, because you're on show. You're being looked at by the senior pros and staff. And even more so now that Liverpool have moved to a new training ground where everybody is in the same place. And arguably the most standout thing that Alex Inglethorpe said in that interview was that they've done some analysis inside the club and they believe that they have around £300 million worth of young talent at their disposal. They've not been bought in at massive expense, certainly not at the expense that some other clubs have tried to do. And they are sitting on a goldmine. They are being looked at by many other clubs across the Premier League and the world as the example. So are Manchester City and others, because they've done really well too. But some clubs are just nowhere near this now, and they're trying to embark upon it. They're going to be investing in their young players, especially pertinent post-Brexit with some of the regulations that limit the influx of players from Europe before the age of 18. And it seems that Liverpool, like with many things, were ahead of the curve. And they're seeing the benefits now. It was only one occasion on the biggest possible stage in terms of crowd size and a trophy at stake, maybe not the biggest competition. But it serves as something really positive, and we should temper it, because Chelsea, for example, who a lot of people seem to be deriding and laughing at, they're a very young team and squad. Not only in age, but in terms of the stage of their development. They've been the youngest squad in the Premier League this season. So Liverpool's young players are benefiting from a club that is already set up, and a structure and processes and where they are on their journey and their genesis for them to come in and succeed. There will be very tough days ahead. There will be very tough decisions ahead. There will be other clubs looking at them. They won't all make the cut. But what we're looking at now is really the gold standard, and Liverpool, their supporters, and everybody connected with the club will be delighted. And that's why I even heard staff around the club saying yesterday that this is the really most important or satisfying trophy of the entire era, not because of it being the League Cup and being Klopp's final season, but because of what it meant in terms of the young players and the circumstances around it all. And when you look at it in that context, as opposed to that headline, it's understandable.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the future of English football. And yeah, I mean, not to say there's a positive to come out of Brexit, but for me, in terms of the development of young British players, which is something the Premier League has always been criticised for in terms of giving them first team chances. You're seeing now a birth of young English players coming through, not necessarily players like the likes of Fabregas, for instance, that would have come to Arsenal in place of players like this. This must be befitting for the future England squad, but also the Premier League in general, David.
Yeah, I'll just make a brief point on that. EPPP was brought into the Premier League some years ago, a big focus on academies and trying to get the homegrown talent right after multiple failures at international level, senior and junior. You could even say the women's side coming up at the same time too. That was never going to produce instant and immediate success. And even after that investment and after the building of the infrastructure and the processes inside the clubs, still the English clubs were not doing so well compared to their continental rivals. I look and speak to people in, say, Portugal, and there are platoons of these young players coming out of Sporting Lisbon, Porto, Benfica. You see the same in Spain at places like Atletico Madrid and Barcelona. France is an absolute hotbed of talent. It's regarded as one of the two key areas for youth development in the world, along with Brazil, which brings me on to South America. But finally, England is starting to catch up. Britain, you could say, because look at some of the Scottish players that have come to the Premier League academies in recent years. And the quality of work, which very rarely gets credited to English coaches, English clubs and systems, British coaches, clubs and systems and administrators as well, is now coming to the boil. The cream is rising, and it's brilliant to see. It's not going to stop being competitive because Europe will fight back. One thing to also say is everybody's branded this solely as a Liverpool academy success. It's not. Many of those players have come from other clubs, from the EFL. So credit to the English pyramid system, which is a big subject of conversation at the moment because of this new deal for football and the Premier League redistribution. But I think a word is deserved and praise for some of those clubs that have produced some of those boys we saw at Wembley yesterday, who are now in Liverpool colours, and Liverpool have taken them on really impressively so far.
Yeah, James, and look, I know you've got your Liverpool hat on for sure, but you look at players that have come in to Liverpool. You've got some really beautiful young stars coming through. Harvey Owen, for instance, £800,000 we've reported that was paid for him. He came from Wolves. Is it still does it then lead us to this point where there's a battle for the best talent, but they end up going to the bigger teams? Wolves are now void of this young kid who could potentially, be part of their system. He's now at Liverpool, sucking Wolves for wonderful talent.
Yeah, I think that's always been the case, hasn't it? The elite talent will always gravitate towards the biggest clubs. I think what's enabled Liverpool to be such an attractive proposition is, as David touched on earlier, it's not a case of offering untold riches to these young players and their families. It's very much about offering a pathway, and that pathway simply doesn't exist at some other elite clubs because whether that's, the structure isn't right, they don't have the manager or coaching staff who are prepared to kind of really show that trust and faith in young talent and persevere with them. So I think, that whenever you speak to agents and families around the academy, when I'm down at Kirkby, they always say the same, that that was the big lure for them of Liverpool, was that, yeah, of course, the badge and the history and the tradition, but they believe the kids will get an opportunity. Someone like Trent Alexander-Arnold's been the poster boy for so long, but now, suddenly there's all these other examples. You look at, Curtis Jones, who of course, like Trent, was out injured on Sunday. Even we talked about the 5 really young rookies who were involved in the final, but Quansah Kelleher, was brought over, as a young teenager from Ireland, and he's been an absolute revelation. I'm not sure there's a better backup keeper around than Quansah Kelleher, and it has been a real kind of. I think they've been very clever in terms of the way they've gone about that recruitment, because it's not just a case of cherry picking the best kids from other clubs. And yeah, they've had to kind of pivot off the back of the Brexit changes. Stefan Bajcetic, who again was one of the injured players out on the weekend, he was like the last of the kind of the pre-Brexit signings. They could bring him in from Spain for, I think, £250,000. And so since then, there's been a much greater focus on young English talent. But yeah, when you think, I think Bobby Clark, even if all the various add-ons are ticked, will end up costing Liverpool £1.5 million. I think McConnell was 200 grand from Sunderland. You've got, Dan's has been with the club since the age of 8, Quansah from the age of 5. So that's the other thing they've been very good at, is getting it right at pre-academy level. And that, Alex Inglethorpe had been fortunate enough to sit down with him many times over 12 years now at Liverpool. And he has really changed that approach in terms of how they recruit at the age of 6 and 7, because a lot of those kids have a lot of the kids we've seen in the Klopp era have been at the club that long. And it is about, he said he felt there was too much of an obsession with getting young kids in who are technically gifted. And he said, we've got to cast the net further afield, looking more at underprivileged communities. He felt the academy, when he walked in, was too middle class, too white, was how he described it. And so, that across the board. So when you're bringing these kids through from a young age, and then when you then need to complement it with elite talent, you've got that pathway you can show parents. That all adds together to be, ultimately the fruits of all that labour coming together on the biggest of stages at Wembley on Sunday.
Nice one. Well, let's move on because no rest for Liverpool, really. Straight back to work ahead of their recent Carabao Cup win. They're playing Southampton in the FA Cup 5th round on Wednesday with a very depleted team. How is Klopp going to manage this one, James?
Well, he did say towards the end of his press conference at Wembley, he said, I don't know where we're going to find 11 players for Wednesday night, because it is a quick turnaround. And yes, they enjoyed the celebrations on Sunday, but even speaking to Andy Robertson in the mix zone after, he was like, we're back in at Kirby on Monday morning. They flew back from Luton, no big party or anything like that, because there's just still too much to go at. And it's going to be another very youthful lineup against Southampton. No doubt about it. I mean, there was a couple of other really gifted kids on the bench who didn't get on in Kumas and Trey Ernie, who they signed from Leicester back in September. And it wouldn't surprise me if they were involved. Cade Gordon, another talented young player who's had issues with injuries the last couple of years. He wasn't in the squad on Sunday, but I think he'll be part of the setup against Southampton. They're waiting to find out the extent of what they believe is ankle ligament damage to Gravenberch after that horrible challenge from Caicedo. And even Wataru Endo, who I thought was absolutely sensational on the day, he came through the mix zone on crutches with his left foot in a protective boot. So the only bit of positive news was probably looking at the way Darwin Núñez celebrated that triumph. He can't be far away from playing again. The way that he didn't look particularly injured, but he hurdled the advertising hoardings to get involved in the celebration. So yeah, obviously getting Núñez and Salah back, and Szoboszlai is not too far away. But it's a big ask, yeah, because it's not just the physical exertions, but the mental, I think, fatigue as well. Because I mean, it's almost unprecedented to think that you're in a position where you could potentially have 13, 14 even senior squad players missing in midweek.
I think we'll be seeing a very strong Liverpool still, though. We know, especially at Anfield, the groundswell of sort of emotion around the Jurgen Klopp departure, but also the adrenaline that now full and bigger stadium brings. It kind of rises Liverpool up, and they will still have some very good, more senior players, and there will be some more minutes given to these promising prospects and talents, which will be fascinating in its own right, because some may point out that you can come on at Wembley, as amazing as it is, that's one occasion, but can you keep doing it, playing 2 or 3 times a week? At that age, their bodies are still developing. Environmentally, it's a completely new challenge with the crowd and the different opponents and things. And in most players' development, there would be some setbacks there. There would be some bumps in the road. You've got the chance to make mistakes, but not really when Liverpool are going for these 4 trophies. And a really interesting point, maybe I'll get James's view on this, is what is next for a lot of these players who might want more regular game time. Okay, not the very youngest ones because there's still time, but somebody like Kelleher, there was interest in him, I think, from the likes of Wolves and Nottingham Forest in the summer. A lot of suggestions around many people that you speak to in the game is that he'll have to move because he's a first choice. He's becoming a first choice goalkeeper, and while Alisson's at Liverpool, it's not going to be there. And he's 25 now, maybe young for a goalkeeper, but he'll have his own ambitions. And a number of the others, if we look historically at Liverpool, they did make sales from academy level, whether it be somebody like Ryan Brewster as he came through. I know he'd previously been at Chelsea. Players like Dominic Solanke, Jordan Ibe, Harry Wilson, and so on. So that, I guess, will be the next phase of this a little bit further down the line.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see what happens next. I think you're right. I would be surprised if Liverpool are able to keep hold of Kelleher for another season. I just think he would have gone last summer, I think, if the right offer had come in. But there was a lot of interest. There was loan offers that Liverpool were never ever going to agree to because it just made no sense financially. And then, of course, I think there was a £15 million bid from Forest in January that again was far too late in the window and didn't come close to meeting their valuation. I think Liverpool view him as probably worth double that. But yeah, I think there is an acceptance. You can only keep hold of someone like him so long. He is, yeah, as you said, David, 25. He wants to play regularly. Klopp has kind of used the domestic cups as kind of to dangle the carrot and hope that there was enough kind of big occasions there to convince him that he still had a future at the club. But he would be the kind of the most obvious one you'd think in terms of adding to that kind of impressive amount of cash that's been generated from players who have emerged from the academy and they've developed. I think Alex Inglethorpe said himself it was around £160 million on his watch that they've generated from sales. And that figure's only going to grow. But I think the exciting thing is it's also going to save Liverpool a lot in terms of the transfer market. When you look at the emergence of someone like Jarrell Quansah this season, there was a clamour to bring in another centre-back. There was, when Joel Matip suffered that ACL injury and was ruled out for the season, it was, they have to go and buy in January. And then suddenly Quansah put together this amazing sequence of performances where you thought, well, they don't, because why would you want someone else blocking his pathway? And the same with Conor Bradley. There's been a lot of talk that they needed to go and get a proper understudy for Alexander Arnold, especially with the kind of the growing belief that Alexander Arnold will become, a kind of bona fide centre midfielder rather than this hybrid role he's been playing. But you look at Conor Bradley and you think, well, how much would you pay for Conor Bradley if he was playing somewhere else and you were looking to bring him in? So I think it all does add up. That you kind of think, there's going to be some tumultuous change at Liverpool this summer with the end of the Klopp era. Yet that does, the caliber of the talent there does bode well for the future in terms of trying to adjust to that adaptation. Because let's not forget Liverpool with their self-sustaining business model. That is absolutely huge in terms of generating that revenue that then can be reinvested back into the squad.
James just took the words out my mouth, Ayo. You and I have spoken so much about financial fair play, profitability.
I was literally going to go there as well. We're in sync here. I like it.
Yeah, remarkable. We've got a sixth sense. Let's talk about six, baby. So it's a key issue in football right now, and in the Premier League in particular. And so many clubs are looking over their shoulder on how they can balance the books and who they need to sell to remain compliant. And they're searching for academy players who might provide that pure profit. Well, Liverpool have got it in spades. They've really become one of, if not the most impressive recruitment operation, which is ironic because for a period it was derided as this transfer committee. It became a bit of a laughing stock, but both ins and outs. You could say they've not sort of replicated the Coutinho level, but I think nobody's replicating that level very easily in terms of what his sale brought in. And they have spent quite heavily. A lot of people pointing that out yesterday in terms of Alisson and Van Dijk. Van Dijk being a key player in that match. He didn't come for cheap by any means. But just in terms of if they do need to bring in some revenues from player sales, then they're spoilt for choice. And that's a position that many clubs would like to be in. And that should serve them really well. And crucially, with these young players as well, when we're looking to the next topic we're going to talk about in terms of the manager, head coach and sporting director, the transition at Manchester United post-Ferguson, and you could even say to an extent at Arsenal post-Wenger, I think you were looking around for, who's going to lead this generation, who's going to be part of it. There's a lot of concerns in the squad, aging or wrong profiles. Is it a poison chalice for the next manager to come in? It proved to be with David Moyes and also Unai Emery to an extent. Well, you could argue that as tough an act as Jurgen Klopp will be to follow and as bigger shoes as they will be to fill, it's a really exciting time because the rebuild has already started and there'll be many coaches, managers out there who can't wait to get their hands on some of the quality and potential at their disposal.
Yeah, James, I mean, yeah, this sort of feel-good factor. And yes, there are lots of injuries. And you've still got senior players still to come back, but Liverpool has still got the Europa League, still 12 or so games in the Premier League to go before the end of the season. Is the emotion of Jurgen Klopp leaving allow it to feel like there's something really special happening at Liverpool now? And I want to, obviously temper excitement, but with the way the cup was won, does there feel like there's something romantic in the air right now at Liverpool?
Yeah, there does. I think you only had to see, that classy gesture where when they were going up the steps, Van Dijk saying, I want you to lift this trophy with me, because they are all doing it for Klopp. That I think when the announcement was made at the back end of January, there was this feeling of which way is it going to go? Because, for a lot of people, it was a bolt out the blue. And it was a case of, well, is it going to be a distraction? Is it going to be like one of those, a shock to the system that potentially derails things, or is it going to bring everyone closer together and really galvanize them to think, right, this era ends on a high? And it's certainly been the latter so far, especially in such difficult circumstances with, one kind of, punishing injury setback after another, to keep on finding a way. I think they've played 7 games since Klopp's announcement. They've won 6 of them. If you include Sunday. So it's and that's I think also speaking to the players afterwards on Sunday, there's a feeling that this to win a trophy in that manner against the odds, really, I'd say, with the absentees, with the kids involved, that should act as the perfect springboard now for bigger prizes. Let's be honest, the Carabao Cup, as special as it was, that Klopp talked about, the other 3 would all mean more in the grand scheme of things. Of course, the Premier League title by far and away the biggest one they're chasing. So yeah, there is a special feeling. Now, I think you can see that togetherness, that resilience, that unity. Just that rendition of "You Never Walk Alone" with all of them linking arms in front of the Liverpool end was pretty spine-tingling on Sunday. And they just need to get some bodies back. That's the thing, because spirit and resilience will carry you so far. But when you've got the kind of punishing schedule Liverpool have got coming up, and let's not forget, there's a little date with Manchester City at Anfield that's only a couple of weeks away now.
Isn't that straight after the Europa League match as well, which is going to be a tough one?
It is, that's why, there's no real time to savor it, because it is Southampton, then it's Forest away, which, is not the easiest place to go to. And then you've got Sparta Prague away in the Europa League. And then 3 days later, Man City coming to Anfield for what could potentially be a title decider. So yeah, So it feels like there's something special brewing, but there's still an awful long way to go before we can say that there'll be the dream finale to the Klopp era.
For sure. David, you alluded to it earlier, but yeah, let's talk about what the future's looking like or shaping up to look like for Liverpool. And we've spoken about Xabi Alonso. We did a podcast on it last week, and just interested from your perspective and what you're hearing, who else is being sort of thrown in the net as prospective names, really, for Jurgen Klopp's successor.
There's no doubt that Xabi Alonso will be high in Liverpool's thinking. That's clear and has been well reported. It wouldn't surprise you if there's been some sort of back channel communication, as is the way with all of these situations. But they won't want to do anything formal to disrupt him, as he's going for his own history at Bayer Leverkusen. I do think it's worth tempering a bit of the excitement, because we speak to multiple people who suggest this isn't a foregone conclusion. The plan was always for him to stay one more year at Bayer Leverkusen. We don't know that he's going to rip that up to leave for Liverpool or even for Bayern Munich. And that brings us on to Bayern, who clearly have him high in their thinking too, and are going to go extremely strongly for him by the looks of it. They usually get what they want, not always. Even Tottenham beat them in the race for Dragusin last summer. And then there's this lingering question about Real Madrid and whether he may hold out for them, whether it be this summer. Unlikely, because Carlo Ancelotti signed a new contract, but that's only worth the paper it's written on, or the year after if Carlo Ancelotti was to move on. So he's in a really strong position, Xabi Alonso. On Saturday evening, Sam Wallace of The Telegraph revealed in his understanding that there are some backup options, including Ruben Amorim of Sporting Lisbon, doing a really good job there. I think he's only in his late 30s, so he's young himself and obviously has no managerial experience on these shores. And also Julian Nagelsmann was mentioned within that report. Now, I think they both perform very well on the data, and that's why they'll be in Liverpool's thinking as potential candidates. But there will be issues around both of them and many other possibilities, by the way. Ruben Amorim's got a release clause in his contract. It was, I think, a year ago when Chelsea spoke to him, up in the 20 millions of euros. Now I understand that it's 10 million euros, which people might feel is low, especially if it was a player signing. But that is high for a managerial appointment, whether we like it or not. And that's a potential issue in this. Julian Nagelsmann is managing Germany until the end of the Euros, which also isn't ideal because that's even later in terms of Xabi Alonso and Ruben Amorim. Also concerns, not just how it went at Bayern Munich and some of the reporting around him, but Liverpool have played his sides before and they've done away with him quite easily. And so maybe there's some technical concerns as well, taking nothing away from, how well he's regarded in the industry. And there will be more. We've seen Thomas Frank has been one of the names that's been mentioned on multiple occasions as somebody else that is impressing many of the top clubs. Ange Postecoglou was one that was mentioned at the beginning, but I'm not aware of anything on that front. So Liverpool are embarking upon this process, and they will be doing this groundwork, which is why some of this is coming out. It will be largely data-led, and that's when Will Spearman, Liverpool's head of research, comes into the conversation. And it will be meticulous and diligent, and they'll know the ramifications of this. They've got to get it right. But on that note, we've got to wind back and talk about the sporting director, because that's likely to be the first appointment. I hear that they would like a direction of travel pretty soon, maybe even early March. Whether that's an appointment or just they know where they're going. We've reported on Michael Edwards having been approached by FSG, Mike Gordon, on a phone call in which he politely declined the opportunity to return to Liverpool or take an even bigger role within FSG. But has John Henry, as principal owner, finished scratching that itch? Could he still go for Michael Edwards? I don't know. I suspect they've got to either make a quick decision, or Michael Edwards would have to make a quick decision, or Liverpool FSG move on. And there have been multiple names in the frame. Simon Hughes on The Athletic reported a couple of them. Ricky Massara, formerly at AC Milan, and a really impressive young option at OGC Nice, who seemingly hasn't been linked with roles at Manchester United on behalf of Ineos. And there are loads of others too, because this sporting director world seems to be getting bigger and bigger. And I think what Liverpool will want to be doing now is doing some groundwork on the manager, so that as and when they appoint this sporting director, they've got options to put in front of him. It's almost like he's able to hit the ground running. But everything I hear is that the sporting director will lead the managerial process from Liverpool, not something that is steered out of Boston, despite the fact that we know that Theo Epstein is coming back into FSG, very influential on the Red Sox and plenty more besides, to kind of advise on the Liverpool process. So of course, Boston will be influential in the appointments, but then it's going to be taken on the ground here. And this is a decision that, is going to have years and maybe generations of ramifications. So we can't underestimate it.
Yeah, for sure. James, final word on this then. Whoever does come in, and whatever that structure looks like, you'd like to think an enticing part of the future of Liverpool is where we started, the youth, the young players that are coming through, and an infrastructure that looks to be set in place for someone to take over. When that success comes is a whole different conversation, but that's got to be attractive for any potential new manager.
Yeah, I believe so. And I think that's why, I think if you're Xabi Alonso, who for me is still by far and away the outstanding candidate to take over in terms of ticking all the boxes. And personally, I would be surprised if he picked Bayern Munich ahead of Liverpool. And I think, just from a purely like common sense perspective, in terms of if he does go on and win the Bundesliga with Leverkusen, I think he's got a superior team to Bayern. You go to Bayern, you're almost expected to win. Where's the real, you got the pressure and the expectation, but without also having to embark on a bit of an overhaul there. So I think, as much as it must be in the back of his mind and anyone else's, that do I really want to be the guy to follow in the footsteps of Jurgen Klopp? Would I not be better off being the guy after the guy? But then you must look at it, and it's not a normal situation. It's not a kind of post Ferguson situation at United where it's an aging team that requires a lot of surgery. That most of that surgery has already been done. You think in the last few years, they rebuilt the front line completely. Last summer they rebuilt the midfield, and then you've had this remarkable kind of tidal wave almost of young talent repeatedly stepping up and grasping the opportunities that have come their way this season. So I think that does make it a really, really attractive proposition, because and I think that's partly why Klopp decided that now was a good time to go, because he said, he hated the idea of handing the club on to someone else, where it was like, well, kind of good luck with that, mate. He wanted to be able to go thinking, yeah, the foundations are here for the success to keep on rolling. And certainly when you see, what was, almost really a Liverpool team that you'd almost expect to see in the third round of the FA Cup, not in a major final at Wembley, winning like that. I think that has to just, especially when you see the scenes after, you think, who would not want to be taking that? Who would not want that array of talent at their disposal going forward into this summer?
Yeah, well, that sounds like a good advert if ever I heard it. James, David, thank you so much for your time. And also, you can hear more from James and our dedicated Liverpool podcast, Walk On, in the aftermath of Sunday's Wembley win, with an episode also dropping tomorrow as in at Tuesday. So make sure you enjoyed that. And also, don't forget to rate and review this podcast, I should say. Thanks so much for listening. We're back tomorrow. If you like this video, click subscribe for more content like this. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season to bring you the inside track to the biggest stories in football. If you'd like to listen to the full episodes for free, search the Athletic Football Podcast wherever you get your podcasts from.